It's all you, Allison.
Yeah. Yes, I just hit the record button, so we are recording and we can have this for posterity. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second episode in our DECA discussion series held on the last Monday of every month. So here we are on the 31st of August, almost September, and talking about anti-racism in Danforth East. It's hosted by the Danforth East Community Association. My name is Allison McMurray, and I am the chair. First of all, I would like to begin by saying we acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaties signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. I'd like to thank our wonderful volunteers at the Danforth East Community Association for helping to plan tonight's discussion. DECA has a lot of really cool things coming this fall, so please renew your membership and stay tuned on our website and social media for more information on what's coming up. You can also, there's a few weeks left until October 15th. You can order your fresh fruits and vegetables and so much more delivered right to your door from the East Lynn Farmers Market, and you can get all of that information on our website. So we're really excited to talk about anti-Black racism in their classrooms. This is a really important discussion and certainly something that is on top of mind for everyone right now with school going back very shortly. And I'd like to thank our distinguished guests for this evening. We have Mr. Jay Williams, hi Jay, and Mr. Matthew Morris. Hello, Matthew. And so I really want to thank you both for coming tonight, and hopefully we'll learn more about quarantine ed. I'm excited to hear more about that. And I'd also like to have a big thank you here to Lanrick Bennet Jr. Again, for collaborating with DECA. It's just been amazing working with you and graciously again agreeing to be our host and moderator tonight. So thanks everyone, and don't want to talk anymore. I wanted to just hand it on over to you, Lanrick. So here we go. Thanks again, episode 2.
Allison, thank you so much. Thank you, DECA. Gentlemen, thank you, Matthew and Jay, for joining us tonight on a, I think it's been a week, it's been a month, it's been a couple of months, a lot of just pent up exhaustion right now, and I just wanted to thank you both for taking the time to come tonight to speak with us. We're a week away from school ish. We'll see what happens over the next little while. But I'm wondering for both of you, just to start us off, what got you into the education field? What drew you into becoming the educators that you are right now?
I guess I could go first. So, you know, I was born and raised in the East End of Toronto in Scarborough, and like many Black kids, the dreams that we had were somewhat limited. You know, it was about, you know, being an athlete or being an entertainer, or, you know, maybe more negative goals and ambitions. There wasn't a lot to look up to. So my path early on led me towards sports, and I earned a scholarship to go play in the States. And, you know, at 17, 18 years old, you're thinking that, yeah, I'm going to go play football in the US, go to the NFL, win a Super Bowl, and then, you know, ride off into the sunset as some businessman or something one day. Well, obviously that didn't quite happen. So when I really had to make a life decision, I wanted to get into coaching, and shout out to all the great football coaches, and great sports coaches out there. You know, without sports, I don't know where I would have been. But once I got into teachers college, because I was like, you know, I'd want to just be a high school football coach at my old high school or something like that. And once I got into teachers college and started to really reflect on not only my path through education, but a lot of my friends and my own family members, and how detrimental the vehicle of education was to a lot of Black men that grew up around me, a lot of them who didn't necessarily make it out of school, didn't graduate. I didn't want to get back. I wanted to become a teacher, but not just like a stereotypical one, not the gym teacher, you know? So that kind of started my process in re-entering education. I wanted to give back to the community, and I also wanted to, in a humble way, try to be a role model for the kids that grow up in Scarborough, to be able to look at someone who's a Black male that still prescribes to hip hop culture, that's not doing anything illegal or illicit, and it also isn't just an athlete or aspiring to be a rapper, just trying to shatter some of those stereotypes that are so prevalent in most of our marginalized societies.
Jay, what brought you into this fold?
It's actually interesting. So I know Matthew's story, obviously, and mine's very similar. I also come from Scarborough, but a very particular community called Malvern, which isn't, I guess, highlighted the best in terms of the news that goes on in Malvern, or has historically. Basketball was my choice of sport, and for me, that was my goal. That was the end goal. It was go to high school, get a scholarship, get good grades, and potentially play in Europe. And all of that was on track to happen until I got injured. So I went to the States, didn't work out, ended up in Halifax, had a great career, got my degree in health sciences. And then by that point, I'd had so many injuries that playing professionally wasn't a realistic goal at that point. So I was really faced with the choice of what's next. And coming from a family of, particularly my mother, but a family of volunteers and community workers and support workers, it really dawned on me that that was my goal. It was almost destined to be for me. So how best could I take the vehicle of education and my passion of sports and meld the two to really find what it is that I would think I'd be best at? And that's just what's happening to be education. Similar to Matthew as well, representation matters. I never had, and still haven't, had a Black educator or a Black teacher in the building growing up when I grew up in Malvern. Excuse me. So that meant a lot. There's a lot of faces that look like mine, a lot of kids who came from the communities that I came from that didn't see anyone in the front of the classroom that looked like them, that talked like them, that literally had the same experiences as them. So coming back to Toronto, specifically the East Side, Scarborough, that's what I really wanted to do. And that's what I continue to do to this day.
Okay. Before I go to the next question, and I have to apologize to the audience, I wanted to kind of just walk you through really quickly how we're going to continue this conversation. I'm going to be talking to both Matthew and Jay for the next 20 or so minutes. We're going to take a 5-minute break. When we come back, we're going to open the floor to our audience, to the community, so that they can put forth questions, put forth their feelings, how anti-Black racism has affected them in the educational piece. We'll take another 5-minute break after that, and then allow for Matthew, myself, and Jay to talk to or about those experiences, those ideas, those questions that are coming from the community. So going back to a question to both of you, you were the co-creators of Quarantine Ed, and of course it seems kind of opened itself up after March break was extended. What was the original genesis for Quarantine Ed? Why bring that to bear?
So I guess I'll go first on this one. Quarantine Ed was actually, I guess, a project that both myself and Matthew and our producer, Michael Prempe, kind of created in the midst of, I guess, quarantine, basically. But more so, we thought, how can we best connect with educators at this time? Because we're all struggling. We're all kind of facing a similar uncertainty as to, what education would look like from March 12th or 13th until the end of the school year. So in doing that, we created a platform and I guess a weekly opportunity for teachers to come together, to share ideas, to vent, to lead on one another, especially during the time of remote learning when it was all, well, I'd say emergency learning, which was all very new to us at that time. It kind of took on a life of its own, I guess, through the magic of social media and through, our extended circles at this time. But it's really grown to be a place of therapy and, positive vibes consistently moving forward. Yeah, it's been fantastic.
There's been a lot of fear, I'm assuming, and a lot of uncertainty with the teaching community. Do you see both of your roles as a bridge for idea making and for just being able to have a safe space?
I think Quarantine Ed, what we've grown over the last couple months, is a platform where it's not judgmental. It's not designed to be PD. We're not experts at anything pertaining to how education looks right now in this day and age, because nobody is an expert in how education is supposed to be rolled out in this day and age. So yeah, for me personally, as one of the moderators of it with Jay, he hit the nail on the head with that word therapy. I see it as therapeutic to begin with, because ironically, we've been quarantined, and teachers naturally operate in a silo, so to speak. It's just a space for a bunch of people to get together, share their fears, share their insights, drop their gems, as we like to say. And it's been productive. As the moderator, I sit with my notebook every single Thursday at 7 p.m. And I have at least 2 or 3 pages at the end of each Thursday. And by 8, I feel a lot better than I did at 6:45, despite the anxiety of going into it at 6:45.
Yeah. And if I could just say, to be, I guess, quite candid, when you think of educators, you don't think of, a person who looks like myself or Matthew, quite frankly. So given that opportunity and given kind of the popularity of Quarantine Ed, it really pushes against the normative images when you think of an educator in Toronto. So that's been also a blessing in itself too.
And that kind of leads me then into asking about the evolution of Quarantine Ed, that it's garnered so much more than just talking about how school may look within the quarantine framework, but you've touched a lot now on the missing pieces of our education system, and that's specifically the people that look like me, the people that look like yourself. How's that evolution, how has that metamorphosis kind of come into itself?
Well, I mean, obviously the murder of George Floyd took place during Quarantine Ed. So conversation went from the emergence of emergency learning or remote learning to discussion on anti-Black racism. And it really took a turning around that time in terms of, people feeling comfortable or stepping out of their uncomfort to have these discussions that weren't necessarily happening in, education circles, whether at your school or with friends or peers who are in the education field. It really took some tough conversation or courageous conversation, if you want to say, for folks who don't look like us to understand what they can do as allies and how to educate themselves. But also it allowed for myself specifically to step out of that uncomfortable space as well, to really share how we were feeling or how I was feeling at that time, which allowed myself to be vulnerable, which is not an easy thing for me to do. I really struggle with that. And not just in Quarantine Ed, but in my own personal life, or even at the school I teach at. There was really some breakthroughs that I think and hoping as we all reapproach September, going back in the fall, that we'll see some of those changes, those tangible changes come into play.
Why, and this may just be a really, blank question as such, but why is it being so hard for the Black voice, for the Black identity, for Black life to be within our educational field? Like why? Why is it being so hard?
You know what I think it is? I think that firstly, education is as a institution, it's already a very conservative institution. Um, so I think that, you know, when it comes to teaching and learning and education, schools are kind of the last people to ever adopt and embrace trends. Like you've seen it with social media use and banning phones and dress code policies and all these things. Education is kind of the last thing. So when it comes to something um, as as dangerous as anti-Black racism, we also live in this politically correct culture as well, where people are afraid to make mistakes. Um, and education has just been the last institution to kind of move on it. But then that video that lasted 8 minutes and 46 seconds happened, um, and the world essentially erupted, and we saw the pandemic within the pandemic. And just to make one thing clear, that what Jay was speaking about earlier, like me and Jay, and I can speak for him because I know him as a friend and a brother, we've always been about this work. It's always been about anti-Black racism work, but it's always kind of also been the trend within education that, you know, you kind of need to keep the politics out of the classroom, and whatever you're doing in your room, just worry about yourself in a professional manner and let the other educators figure out what they want to do in their messages. But then that video happened and everything changed. So you know, it was kind of a collective understanding between us where it's like, regardless of what we talk about, regardless of what happens on CP24 every 1 p.m., which seemed like was happening every day throughout the whole summer, we are going to talk about Black lives because they do matter. And, you know, enough is enough. So I think, you know, to answer your original question about like, why has it been left behind? It's because it gets draped up in politics, you know, and in an insidious way gets left out of the conversation within the school. But it's, you know, enough is enough at this point.
Does it heighten the reasoning to make sure that we're talking about anti-Black racism, not just because of what we're seeing in the States, but also what's happening here in this city and what has been happening in the city for decades? It's not a secret that there's been a tension between the Black community and our police force per se, but that hasn't necessarily been put forth in a classroom setting.
100%, 100%. I think, Lanrick, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, you can ask 9 out of 10 brothers about their experiences or their thoughts of the police officers or their interactions with police officers, and we'll all tell you the same thing. Not a lot of them have been positive, right? Not a lot of them have been positive. So that fear that I think a lot of young Black men in America face when it comes to dealing with officers or police officers is still here too, right? A lot of the same issues that we're facing when dealing with the negative interactions of police officers is definitely very prevalent in Toronto, going across the city. So taking that and then informing in the classroom, they go hand in hand, in my opinion. And I think I do a pretty solid job in terms of having those discussions, not just with my Black students or my Black male boys, but with all my students, to make sure that we can first bring awareness to it and then talk about some of the issues that will come out of that and maybe some resolutions. So in a roundabout way of answering your question, 100%, 100%.
I'm wondering how other teachers that aren't Black, how are they either allies or silent partners in what is transforming right now in our educational field, where we need to be talking about these topics? Are they there? And I say this very bluntly: are our white teachers there as conduits to help change, or is there still more for them to learn and to understand about where this topic and where this situation is now going?
That's a great question. And, you know, it's tricky because, let's just be honest, racism is tricky. I think that for white teachers in their role as trying to be allies and advocates for a better future, the first step is decentering themselves. But that's also complicated too. Jay said earlier that he's been the only black teacher. He's never had a black teacher, and he's the only one in his school, so on and so forth. There's a tricky tightrope between decentering yourself as a white educator and asking question after question after question to the black guy that you know.
Mm.
I'm a black man. I don't speak on behalf of every black person. I have my opinions, and I am willing to take part of the lead in this work when it comes to equity for our communities. But I'm also tired, like I'm exhausted. You know, you talked about what's happening in the US, and it happens in Canada too. I've gotten pulled over by myself and not got a ticket. I've gotten pulled over with my dad, who's 65, for no reason. A full U-turn right behind me, no ticket, just nonsense, because I lived in an at-risk neighborhood. Like, it's exhausting to live like this, right? And we're trying to do our best, but we're not experts. So when it comes to allyship, priority number one is do some of the work yourself. You know, read literature, ask, you know, ask people, have conversations without asking from a way where it feels like you're just pulling, you know? So that's where I stand on it right now. It's very intricate, but you need to understand that this thing is not going to get answered in one day. And it's not all of a sudden like, you know, the black guy that you work with is the expert on all matters pertaining to race, nor maybe he doesn't feel like he wants to be. And that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I agree 100%. We are tired. It's a lot. I think, especially right around the time when George Floyd was murdered, I was bombarded with phone calls upon phone calls from my friends who happen to be white, asking what they could do. And again, it's all about timing, right? As Matthew said, peppering us with questions at this time is not the right solution. No, not at all. Do some of the work yourself. Have conversations, even in your own circles, that happen to be white as well, to discuss amongst yourselves what you do know too, right? Because that's a lot of the work as well too. So it is tricky. It's a slippery slope.
Moving from the teachers then to the students, to the kids, how, and I know it may be a bit harder now because we're not in school, but even before COVID, how were kids handling that, those eyes on them, those black children? How were they, how was the stress on their lives within your purview?
So we both teach middle school. I teach grade 7, grade 8, math, English, science. And it's funny because some of the black students struggle at articulating exactly how they feel when it comes to some of the struggles that they're facing. And then some obviously can articulate it. What I found is, especially when it comes to my young black boys, in my mentoring groups, when I have conversations and I'll throw out, you know, topics or ideas or examples, in those 4 walls, they definitely feel safer in sharing some of their experiences and their frustrations. And sometimes it's simply just a session of, you know, this and this happened. Mr. Will, what do you think about that? Right? And it allows an opportunity for me to be no holds bars in my response, when sometimes I felt as though I had to be more politically correct amongst my peers and my colleagues. So it's a struggle. It's a struggle. Those who can articulate it, I think, are doing a bit better, but there are those who are maybe a bit younger, don't understand some of the maybe microaggressions that they face daily by their peers and by their teachers who are supposed to be there, you know, taking care of them and teaching them. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle. So I personally believe it's my biggest duty, or one of my biggest duties, to protect my young black students.
And that's the thing too, right? Like, Jay, you speak about it in a great way. It's hard for somebody to articulate, a teenager or a child to articulate microaggressions and little things that they're experiencing. Let me be clear on this. There are always 2 sets of curriculum that schools are teaching. There's the content of math and science and photosynthesis and Pythagorean's theorem and all that. And then there's the implicit instruction, the messages that we get as bodies, the messages that there's an ideal universal student. If you don't walk and talk and behave and act a certain way, then you don't belong, you're outside of this norm. And this is something that, you know, it's subconsciously felt. It's hard to articulate. This is where my graduate work is on. You know, I did a TEDx talk called The Fresh Prince Syndrome. It's on YouTube. Check it out if you know, you have time. When I was in high school, and this is not new, when I was in high school, I would passively resist the school because I felt like that was my only way of validating myself, because I felt like I didn't belong. And thankfully, I had sports, I had parenting, I had my own individual drives and a lot of other complex things that all go into identity, and unfortunately, how my brain works, I'm able to regurgitate information in a way that blends with traditional schooling. But when I get told by teachers that, oh, I'm surprised you did so well, and, you know, these acting like I'm an anomaly just because of how I look, those are things that you can't even articulate as a 15-year-old Black boy or Black girl. And these are when these adults that are caring are trying to be positive, let alone the surveillance and all the other negativity. You know, it's very damaging. So how do they feel? It's hard. I mean, imagine being surveilled at all times. Every policy, for the most part, is geared to kind of, you know, change your culture and your vernacular and your aesthetics, and then be expected to blend into this system where at every turn you ostensibly don't belong.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder then putting more of the Black community, the Black experience within the curriculum that our young Black people, Black children, students, the entire student body in general, could that be a bridge? Could that help to start to open up those conversations and to allow Black students to have that pressure, have that weight taken off of them, where they get to see themselves in what it is that they're learning about?
Well, Lanrick, here's the thing in terms of responding to that question. The thing with the curriculum is that it is flexible enough in that it allows teachers to choose some of the resources that you've mentioned in terms of seeing themselves in some of the, you know, curriculum on the walls, videos, whatever the case is. The whole point is of the problem is that teachers have not done this. They've had the choice to do these things, but they've chosen not to.
Because we want to get beyond just Black History Month.
Of course.
We want to get beyond just 28 days.
Listen, to be clear, in my classroom, we don't do Black History Month. We don't do it. It's not something that I recognize in terms of celebratory work in my classroom. Why? Because I do that all year round.
Yeah.
Right? From September to June, it's Black history. It's interwoven throughout my program and my curriculum, if you will, consciously and subconsciously. But me showing up to work September 15th, Black history has started, right? The representation of myself as an educator, you know, covered in tattoos, hat on backwards, chains out, speaking the way I speak, and all of my experiences teaching the quote unquote curriculum, I've already done that from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Right? So it's up to teachers really and truly to decide what they want to then choose for the representation of the curriculum. The curriculum can be melded. It's easy to do that.
Right? And why is it being so hard then? And I'm sorry, I don't want to throw it on both of you to give me like the solid answer, but it seems so frustrating because, Jay, how you're explaining it, yeah, it's like it should be that easy to just kind of craft it in a more holistic way, as opposed to just being so rigid and so straight and so white.
I'll say this before Matthew wants to go, because I know he wants to respond to this too. In my experiences, teachers are creatures of habit. There is a way that things have been done traditionally, and we talked about this on Confronting recently. The education system has been a whitewashed narrative from the very beginning, right? And we can all admit that, we can all say that quite confidently and know that. So to push back against that is the difficult piece, but what does that then mean? Are you willing to do the extra work? Are you willing to put in more work to find the resources, to have conversations, to put yourself in an uncomfortable space? Those are the questions I really believe the educators need to be asking themselves, especially now if they haven't asked themselves that prior to this moment.
Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Lanrick, you're asking the $1 million question right there. You know, like that's a deeply philosophical question, right? And of course, there are some. I mean, there's a couple answers that are in our face that are, you know, it's difficult for us to speak about, but I guess I'll try my best. Racism has navigated society so well that it's compelled everyone to be implicit within it, right? And it's so hard to reframe and constantly reflect on our own biases, the bias of the system of education, the fact that teachers have learned from teachers that existed in a time. If we're talking about, you know, the east end of our city, the demographical shift that's happened in the last 30, 40 years is done 180 degrees, right? And the teachers that existed in that structure when it was the Scarborough Board of Education, a lot of them still work in the Toronto District School Board. And they were the ones that taught the next generations of teachers how to teach, and that next generation of teachers how to teach. And by the way, up until recently, the demographics haven't really reflected the communities in which the students come from compared to the demographics of a teaching staff. And you wonder why it's taken so long and it's so hard, and we still have this push out rate that everyone has known about since the 1980s, and it still hasn't changed. It hasn't fluctuated. Why do you think it hasn't fluctuated? You know, it's because racism operates like that. You know, I'm a teacher, so I'm being honest. Every 4, 5, 6 years, there's a reframing of priorities within education that takes away the deep systemic issues that lie within education. So therefore, you know, teachers have to worry about how to teach a new math curriculum, or how to do a 3-part lesson, or how to implement 21st century learning skills, how to write a report card differently. And all the while, the status quo remains the same. Yeah, I don't want to talk too long about that because I could
I'm going to hold you there. We're going to take a 3-minute break because we went over just a little bit. I'm going to throw this as gently as possible to our audience. If you have been experiencing anti-Black racism in your classrooms, in your children's classrooms, if there's an educational bend that you're feeling needs to be brought up tonight, and I don't want to dig too hard and I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but if you feel willing and wanting, we want to give the next 20 minutes to, again, allow for this audience to be able to talk. So we're going to take a 3-minute break. We've got a few questions that are in the chat right now, and we'll come back, yeah, literally in like 3 minutes, and we'll get back to this. Okay, everyone, and we're back. Again, I want to open the floor up to our community. You can put a hand up, put something into the chat. I can't remember if I had brought this up during the first discussion, but for my kids, I've got a 12-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. And I remember talking with Allison about this within one of our first discussions, and I talked about how I felt I needed to protect my children when it came to dealing with police. And I live literally down the street from the Danforth. And we'd have tastes on the Danforth going on over the summer, and I would bring my kids face to face with police officers, and I would let them introduce themselves to these officers in the hopes that these men and women would understand that my kids and myself weren't of any trouble, and that we weren't going to cause them harm. And I tried to put this in my kids' headspace that that these people that they can cause harm, that something bad could happen with them. But if you yourself are proactive in making sure that you're in front of them, that you show your ability to just be yourselves, that you'll almost have the upper hand on it. And I can kind of now see where both my kids, when they start interacting with their teachers, that they're very proactive on making sure that I'm here, I'm Zoe, I'm Jackson, and they're not that they're afraid of their teachers, but they want to make sure that they are shown to be present. And it's I don't know if that's a good thing as a parent, I don't know if it's a bad thing as a parent. I just know that I want to try and protect them as best as possible, and I want them to feel confident in themselves, but also understand that sometimes there are people that are going to hurt them, and that they need to be proactively protecting themselves. Dara, I see your hand up.
Hi. I wanted to actually start by mentioning, I know you mentioned that there were some comments in the chats, but it looks like the chat is disabled. So I'm not sure whether other people have also had difficulty or are not understanding where the comments are supposed to be.
I think they're coming from, sorry, I think they're coming from the Facebook page.
Oh, they're coming from the Facebook page. Okay.
I apologize. Yeah.
Because in the Zoom group, the chat is disabled.
Okay.
So it's a bit earlier than I had wanted to talk in this, but since I'm on, I guess I might as well say something, and I'll try not to be as long as I was last time.
Please be as long as you need to be.
No. So I guess I have a question for Jay and Matthew. My husband and I, we have two sons, one who is going into grade 2, another going into JK. Our eldest, his grade 1 year was pretty horrible. With a teacher who, my experience was exhibiting quite a bit of anti-Black racism and basically, I think one of you was saying, you know, teachers get very much stuck in their ways and how they do things. And our eldest son is, I think he's exceptional. He is quick with numbers. He is all of a sudden loving to read. And these are things that that his teacher did not recognize in him. And it was lots of complaints over and over and over again. He was the darkest skinned child in his class, one of two children who would consider themselves Black, came home at some point in the winter telling us that it's better to be white. His school is very non-diverse, in my opinion. I was actually surprised by it when he started going to school there. And I felt that there hasn't been enough support, not only from the teacher, but also from the school's administration. So I would like to, if you guys are able to speak on this, like what has your experience been, like, do you feel that the push for teachers to change their approach should just be left to the teachers, or should principals be leading the way in this?
Gentlemen?
Yeah, so I mean, Matthew can respond to this too, but as far as I know, at least where TDSB is concerned, it's something that is coming from the very top down, right? So we as educators have PD this week, so professional development all this week, and one of those days, or at least a few of those days, is dedicated to anti-Black racism education and what that looks like in each school. My school specifically has formed a anti-Black racism education committee that I kind of head up at this point, or at least co-head up, if that's what you want to say. But really and truly, it's a difficult kind of question to answer because each school is different. And if you're saying the admin at the school, you don't feel as supportive in this as well, there are some steps that you can sort of take to go over their head, if you will, to ensure.
I have taken those steps, but TDSB moves extremely slowly. And we are at the point where we're starting a new school year, still with concerns about our ability to trust in how the teachers and administration are going to treat our children now, because we will now have two Black boys at this school, where, you know, our eldest last year was feeling very much like he was not good enough, because he was constantly being sent to the office for various things. Right. I'm trying not to get into details because then I will start to cry, because this is, you know, it's very emotional stuff. Like, yeah. 6 years old. You know, I think one of you were saying earlier that even at middle school age, you know, they don't have the words to explain what it is that they're feeling. And, you know, it's not just at the middle school age that this stuff is happening, that they're experiencing this feeling of otherness. Sorry, but there I cut you off. Please go ahead.
No, I mean, I feel your pain. Another option, the thing is with that, you know, because of everything that's happened in 2020, teachers are going to be getting a lot of PD on anti-Black racism starting this week. But who's leading it, right? It's the same admin within a school that are expected to lead the PD. And it's unfortunate, right? Because they're, first of all, for a little insight, this week teachers are getting PD on PPE, so the equipment, and then math strategy, mental health and wellness, anti-Black racism, remote learning. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. When, you know, like, how do you do justice to something as important when it gets thrown in with new math strategy? And it's the people who are leading it have maybe never considered it before this year, right? But there is, you know, I'm a believer in self-determinism, and I don't know what the parent council community looks like within your school area, but you know, sometimes trying to change a culture within a school, unfortunately, the burden rests on us as the community. It rests on going to those parent council meetings, having these discussions with the admin at that school, questioning some of the pedagogy that is used in the classroom, speaking with teacher friends to get up on some of the quote unquote language, so that these admin can't just, our teachers brush you in and out of the school and just talk circles over your head. You know what I mean? Because, you know, there's that teacher talk thing. And as if you're not I know I have a friend who had an issue. He's not a teacher. I told him a couple things to say to his admin. It went better than it probably would have if he just went in there all upset, you know? So I don't know. It's tough, man. But this is something that, you know, has been happening for decades. The things that have been successful are just the whole self-determinism route of school council and just voicing your concerns at every corner.
Right. I mean, you could also talk to your trustee. It sounds as though you've been a presence in the school already. I would obviously continue that presence, but it's difficult, obviously, because there's a line in terms of maybe thinking, are you doing too much, right? But as you mentioned, though, too, it definitely does not start in middle school, right? Young Black boys like your son at the age of 6 are hopefully not going to continue to feel this moving forward, but oftentimes that is the case at such a young age. And because he can't voice exactly what it is that he feels just yet, by the time he moves on and maybe has it 2 or 3 more, 4 more times in later grades, now he's really down on himself in terms of his self-worth and self-value. So, I mean, definitely get in contact with your trustee if you feel as though your admin is not there, or even your superintendent. Continue to be a presence. And as Matthew mentioned, that self-determinism route is huge.
Tara, thank you. Cynthia, you had your hand up. Would you like to speak? Hi, Cynthia.
Hi there. Sorry, I was just like, my heart was going out to that mom that was just speaking, and I'm an elementary school teacher who's part of the quarantine ed. I love Jay and Matthew. They've totally helped us through this pandemic, and I live in the East End, so I very much wanted to check out what was going on. And I have to say, like, attitude reflects leadership. So if that principal is not setting that tone in a way that, you know, addresses what's going on with the teachers in that school, then just like Jay and Matt were saying, absolutely go over their heads. I think oftentimes, like, we can be too passive. And I think now is the time to just keep hammering those messages until the trustees or MPs are going to listen. But everything they said is true about how slow cultural change can be within a school and within a community. And if, you know, her son is at such a young age, one of the only students of color, and that's a lot to put on a little boy. And so, you know, there's also the thing to know that administration does change. So that person may not be permanent, and someone else could come into that school and totally turn it around. I've seen it happen. And then there's also shopping around. Look for the community that you want to be a part of, because it's Toronto. We are very diverse, and it's out there. And so, you know, I would do a little homework of what other schools are in my area that could be more diverse or more inclusive.
Right. Thank you, Cynthia. A question from our Facebook page. And guys, I'm kind of changing on the fly here. I know that we were just going to kind of have it, having the community speak, but I've got questions kind of going back and forth. So if you're
Funny has conditioned us for that. We're good.
Go for it. Go for it. Go for it.
So one of them is if you could clarify a bit on the political correctness and what you're feeling as teachers are hindering your ability to do the work that you want to do.
So I said that, I mentioned that earlier, and what I mean by political correctness, I'll elaborate a little bit. So when I got into teaching, when I was in Teachers College, you know, we were taught to park our politics in the car before we entered into the school building. Like, I remember it was a quote similar to that, like, you shouldn't be talking about your personal politics and these things in class. That was 10 years ago. All right. They're killing Black men on camera, and it has psychic effects on our community. If the status quo remains the status quo, I'm sorry, if the status quo remains the status quo, if no one challenges the status quo in schools, in classrooms, the very site where learning is supposed to originate from, then what are we expecting is going to change, right? So that's what I mean when I talk about a political correct environment in which teachers are unwilling to talk about George Floyd. They're unwilling to talk about 3-4 years ago when the H&M put a little Black boy in a hoodie that said "coolest monkey on earth." Teachers don't want to touch that. We don't live in a culture where we can avoid talking about these things. If we don't talk about these things, and again, maybe the word politically correct is the wrong term that I'm looking for. What I'm speaking about more is being critical of what is happening in the world. The curriculum is going to happen. We have 10 months. You're going to teach those kids how a leaf changes color. All right, we got that. We'll get to that photosynthesis thing. But in the meantime, there's time to build and critically discuss everything that is going on in our culture. That to me is the purpose of school. So to kind of, hopefully I answered that question in terms of political correctness. There's a fragility around speaking about things that are very touchy. And that needs to, you know, and it's for everyone, Black teachers, white teachers, you need to just jump in and engage in the work.
Jay, I'm gonna maybe see if you want to tackle this one.
Mm-hmm.
We not only deal with classroom criminalization of children, but community as well. It's a hypervigilance and a wider criminalization of the full community. How would you best address this for staff, for parents, for the students in the classroom?
So first of all, that comment is very true. I guess I'll talk from my own experience. I work in a community where there is a very large divide in terms of class and race. You have a strong working class, you have a maybe strong middle class, then you also have a very poor lower class community that for the most part, you're looking at racialized children and students. What I find is that the inherent biases of educators in that building then come into play very realistically and very tangibly in how they communicate with those students, how they inform those students, how they teach those students. Luckily, I've been present to that and I've seen it, but at the same time, there's opportunities and situations where I don't see it. And again, I mentioned before that I feel as though I have this cape on my back where I need to protect my students or students who look like me or come from the same kind of experiences that I have. But oftentimes I'm not there to do that. They come to me and share these experiences, but it's been difficult because I then have been, up until this year, and I'll say that very clearly, hesitant in approaching my colleagues and letting them know that maybe some of the ways in which they confront students, because that's what it is. They're not teaching some students, they're simply confronting them. Or as this person has mentioned, criminalizing them based on their experiences, based on their location, and very, very evidently based on their skin color. So I said that earlier, that up until this year, I have been quiet, but that's no longer the case, right? I feel as though it's my job to protect and speak up for those who haven't learned yet how to speak up. And yeah, that's starting as of now.
Another question. Sorry, just my son just came down. Just a parent saying that they're in the East End, they're in an East End neighborhood that isn't as diverse as they had hoped. However, they want to join their parent council. How have you two seen parent council as a? Have you seen it as a bridge? Have you seen it as a way to talk about anti-Black racism? Has there been any push within that fold of a school to make change?
I have. I work in a middle school that 3 schools feed in from very, very diverse residential areas. So, you know, and there are different quote unquote conflicts that exist in the different schools that feed into our school. So I've seen it, and how I think it best works is when there's a group of parents that come together as a collective and just simply talk about some of the issues that are going on. Because the thing that for parents, that, you know, what parents need to remember is that 99% of the teachers that are teaching your children don't live in your community and probably never did live in your community. So those two things are deep realities that parents need to understand how the school operates. A lot of teachers hop on the highway on their way home, and especially if we're talking about some of these areas in the East End of the city. You know, for the most part, the majority of the teachers that I work with, they live in Pickering, Durham, and Ajax, Durham region, and they come and teach in Scarborough. I'm not saying that you need to like fully understand all the intricacies of a community in order to do the job, but that is a oversight that is a big reason for a lot of the dysfunction that happens sometimes between community and the school.
Mm-hmm.
Jay, did you want to add on to that, or?
I was just gonna agree with Matthew that, I mean, it definitely is possible. I mean, similar to the issue that Dara was mentioning earlier, the presence in the school, the power of parents coming together in the school is amazing if done correctly and if advocating for the right things. I don't know what the community looks like in Dara's community, or Dara's community, but I can assume. So yeah, I mean, it's possible. I've seen it done. I've seen it done well. I've seen it done in terms of advocating for Black children. So I know it's possible. I'm trying to think of ways in which we can. Sorry, I'm still stuck on Dara and trying to figure out ways to help this mom too.
And just throwing it out to our audience right now, if anyone wants to talk about experiences of racism within the school system, within our community, please raise your hand, and we want to hear from you if you feel comfortable with that. To both of you, to Jay and to Matthew, who do you feel holds schools accountable for how things have not gone properly when it comes to the PD and to talking about anti-Black racism? Who do we blame on that, or who should we then, as parents or as community, put pressure on to make that viable and to make something happen?
Realistically, I think the blame falls on many people. It's funny because TDSB is what, the 4th or 5th largest board in North America? 5th, 6th? Okay.
6th. Okay.
6th? Awesome. So you would assume that being said, it's diverse. Toronto's a very diverse city. But I think, as Matthew was saying before, there's just this fear of rocking the boat, of shaking the status quo. And I'll put some of that blame on myself. As an educator coming in 10, 11 years ago, I was very, aware and cognizant of my place, quote unquote, in education, and not wanting to push back against some of that. It's only, I guess, maybe the last six years or so where I've, awoken and decided that regardless of what may be thought of how I present, I'm definitely going to push back against that. When I say that there's various people that could be responsible, or various locations where you could point the finger, obviously you look at the board a little bit, you look at admin, you look at superintendents, you look at trustees, but you also look at community too, right? Schools are the hub or the safe place of many communities. So is it possible that communities can then inform what they want their students or kids to be held as important in their schools? Of course it is, right? So it takes a lot of different moving pieces in order for the overall product at the end to be something that we're proud of. And I think that it's easy to point the finger at simply TDSB or your school administration, but we all hold some stake in making sure that the end result is something that we can make better, obviously, at the end of the day, but also ensure that we're leaving education in a better place too.
Yeah, and I feel like in some of we're so ingrained culturally to think of the school as a place where you send your kids and everything will be okay. And almost I remember when my dad or mom would be like, yo, I don't want to hear no phone calls from the school. You better go act right. That's our cultural negotiation with the school. And I feel that a lot of just the narrative around, our communities is that we don't understand the power that we have as parents. Parents have a lot of power. Some of the things that flies, sadly, in our schools that we're talking about could never, ever, ever fly in Forest Hills or one of these communities where the dynamic of the school and the parents is a little bit different. And if for the parents that are listening, I just urge you to understand the power that you have. You essentially are the people that pay principals, superintendents, caretakers, teachers. Your taxes pay their paychecks. So, you need to come in with that type of energy if you have an issue with what's going on, because it's your children. This is not like a car that has a defect that you bring it back to the place you bought it to finagle with. These are bodies we're speaking of. This is life, so that would be my message, man. Understand the power that you hold as parents.
I've got a question about curriculum and just wondering your take on what can be brought into history class, into English classes, into social studies. What are you looking at expanding within those curriculum bases to bring forth more of the Black experience into classrooms?
Anything and everything. I'll say that. Anything and everything. So it starts with, obviously, my own experiences. It starts with me being the body in that room as the facilitator, but understanding that the learning will come from me and be of me too, right? So if I do have, students who are of, African descent, whatever the case is, within descent, we'll share in that too, but it's the sharing of everything and anything that is all Black experience. So we're talking about literature, we're talking about film, we're talking about hip hop culture, West Indian culture, African culture, we're talking about guest speakers, so maybe people who are outside of the building coming to share their experiences too and their story, but it's really just infusing the quote unquote curriculum with everything and everything Black.
And how does that happen without, and I'm going to say it bluntly,
without
erasing white history? And I know that sounds really weird just coming out of my mouth, but I'm hearing a pushback on the fact of, well, why can't we talk about all the good things that John A. Macdonald did? Why do we have to bring up all of the other stuff? And which I'm scratching my head within that. Is there a pushback coming from schools to not allow for all of this Black goodness to be put forth in front of our students?
I'm sure there will be, Lanrick, and we both know the answer to that question. We all do, but here's the thing. They've already had that history. They've gotten that history every single year in school so far, right? They've learned about all the things that Sir John A. Macdonald has done positively. Didn't Sir John A. Macdonald's statue just get tossed or torn down recently?
In Montreal, yeah.
So let's talk about some of the things that he did negatively, if you really want to get to the nitty gritty, right? But to answer your question, infusing everything and everything all Black doesn't necessarily mean that we are removing the white. We're just simply adding it.
Yeah.
Right? Because it hasn't been included up until this point, unless we're talking about Black History Month or your Black History announcement, which I despise. Right? We're not doing that no more. We're infusing it in every possible opportunity, in addition to what already exists, or in replacement of, but we're not, sorry, not in replacement of, but we're not simply saying that everything white that's positive is now being removed, but we're simply gonna add some of the negative pieces then too, because that's not included in that curriculum.
Giving it true context.
What's that?
Giving just in that fact that it's not just talking about the good stuff, but allowing for some of the realism of what these people, what history in general has been all about.
Exactly, and we see that case in point when in 2015 was the Reconciliation Project, right, where we're talking about Indigenous peoples and what really happened, and there was a highlight in that, which is fantastic. But prior to that, unless teachers chose to include that in the curriculum, that wasn't discussed. That wasn't included. You didn't learn about residential schools on a level where it was mandated, right? The school I was at that time, the principal mandated that was then discussed or taught in part of our history, in part of our history curriculum.
Here's another question right now. Do we think that more Afrocentric schools are the answer? Where's the Afrocentric high school? Someone's asking it, if you know what may have happened with the Afrocentric high school that was promised.
So they tried to have an Afrocentric program, and what happened is it in a way got co-opted, and it became a site for the at-risk kids, and it just got very convoluted in terms of the message. My thing, and you could have a different opinion, my thing about the Afrocentric school is why are we running away from the challenges that we have? Why can't we fix the schools that exist in the Toronto District School Board? Why do we want to segregate? We don't live in a segregated society for the most part. We live in an integrated society. So why are we going to take one of our biggest institutions, education, the most vital institution to child development, and then segregate them? Why don't we just hire better teachers, change teaching credentials so it doesn't impede the geniuses that you run into all over the place that would be great teachers? The barbers that are, half of them are uncertified therapists that are able to talk for hours to people. These are the people that need to be in our public schools as teachers. Teacher accreditation needs to change. People need to understand and reflect on how bias works in our school. Like Jay was mentioning, some of the curriculum needs to be diverted. Why do we always, when it comes to history, start from a point when we talk about Black bodies from a point of victimization, right? You talk about all the good things John A. Macdonald did. What about all the Black people that have existed in the last 400 years that have done great things? Most people walking around in Toronto can't name 10 Black people that have done anything prominent outside of bounce, no disrespect to the NBA, outside of dribble a basketball and put together 16 bars that rhyme. Like, that is where we need to interrogate our public school system. We don't need to revert to a segregated model. I understand that, that is a concern and maybe is an option, but I don't think that's the solution. I think the solution exists in the schools that we have right now. And I don't think that, I think avoiding that and digging deep, avoiding that and not digging deep, I don't think that's a maneuver.
Yeah, definitely agree. And just to add to that, I personally believe that the Afrocentric school was set up for failure, realistically. It was, the program itself didn't have its own building or own school. It was housed in another school, another building. And there were issues from the very beginning in terms of the dynamic that existed within that school. That being, and similar to what Matthew said, there was too many hands in the pot, if you will, too many political hands in the pot, kind of trying to maneuver what they thought the program should be, hence why it never really exploded to what it needed to be.
I've got a, this one's a tough one. My child was put in a cardboard box in junior kindergarten for 12 months before I found out. My child was stabbed. This child was ganged up in the bathroom, tried to defend himself, but was reprimanded because of that. This parent's fearful of just the status quo of such, and is wondering where they might be able to take this abuse that their child is going through.
I'm speechless, man. I'm literally speechless at that one.
I mean, hey, that sounds beyond egregious. And if the question is where they should take that, go ahead and run that up to the Toronto Star right now. Like,
100%. Yeah.
Everyone that is in a role of caring and guidance that was privy to that is fight. Like, that's, you don't get fired for too much for being a teacher. You get fired for stuff like that. Like putting a child in a cardboard box and then allowing the unsupervision. And if this happened in kindergarten where a child was, ganged up on and, hurt in a bathroom, there's protocols in place for stuff like this. Like there's supposed to be supervision so that, first of all, 6, 7 kids aren't in the kindergarten bathroom at one time. And secondly, so that things like this don't happen. So, that's sad. Like, I'm sorry to hear that is happening in our school systems, but that you need to alert the people who are writing these articles about issues like that.
Yeah, that's crazy. My heart goes out to that parent, obviously, because their child had to endure that. But I mean, excuse my phrasing, but some heads need to roll for that. That's crazy, right? Safety is the utmost important to any educator, I'd assume. So that being said, when safety is not put as a priority, then some people need to be held responsible, right? Educators, administrators, support workers, whatever the case is in this situation. And it sounds as though that, like, that's the true definition or example of education failing a child, and that's what's happened here. So, as Matthew mentioned, hit the star up. Talk to your what am I thinking? Talk to your superintendent. Just go above everyone's head at this point, right? Go above everyone's head at this point. That's crazy to me.
Dara, I'm going to bring you back in. You've put your hand up again, and I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Oh, I didn't put my hand up again. Sorry.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize. I apologize. Okay, a few more coming here. How can we start introducing celebrating Black History Month every day instead of just in February? I know you touched on this a bit, Jay, but maybe expand on that. How do we go beyond 28 or 29 days?
I'll let Matthew go with that one.
Yeah, I think that it's not difficult. I think that we're at a point where the priority needs to be understanding humanity. And that's part of the problem when you hear about these stories of people getting ostracized or felt left out. And this is an answer at this point that every single teacher who graduates from a faculty of education will say in an interview, but they may never follow up on. Where is the content that is relevant and reflective of the bodies in front of you when you teach? You know, there's a great book. I wouldn't recommend it to like Cadis, obviously not kindergarten, but like junior grades 4 to 6. But there's a book that I use in my classroom by David Sharandi. It's called Brother. It's about a community in Scarborough. Like, why are we, you know, that should be our new To Kill a Mockingbird. Why are we not reading about our culture, interrogating the complexities of our identity, understanding that the stereotypical images that we are constantly berated with aren't the things that we should be leading with? Look, I'm big into hip hop. I'm big into the culture. But if your only lesson of integrating, you know, our culture and centering Blackness is to, you know, switch out the poetry you use and bring in some rap lyrics, you are not doing the work. You know, it's not about these stereotypical and perpetuating images and ideologies of what Black life is about. It's, you know, how do you celebrate it every day? The culture needs to be reflected in a variety of forms, right? And even to get back to what Dara was speaking about in regards to how her son was being perceived in the class, I don't know who's going to lead the professional development, but, you know, educators need to understand that certain cultures, you know, behave in other ways. For a young Black boy to be excited about something, he might not put his hand up. He might speak out. He might stand up. Like, that is, you know, especially if he's 12, 13 and he's engaged in hip hop culture and these other things, the way we engage and the way our brilliance looks may look different. And these are the things that need to come to the table when we talk about how we can integrate Black brilliance into public school education on a daily basis.
So this one is from a teacher. I would like to know how I'm a white educator, can best support my new teaching partner, who is a person of color, in a school where I have unfortunately witnessed another colleague be openly racist in their comments and their actions against students and my new teaching partner. The administration is very aware, and while I hope we are receiving PD on this very issue, we definitely and desperately need it. My fear is that it's not going to change. I am educating myself, reading podcasts, and these sessions have been amazing in helping me better understand my new teaching partner's perspective.
Couple things. So it sounds as though this person is doing the work, so at least started the work in terms of reading and, you know, at least having conversations with the podcast situation, which is great. But I would say it sounds as though that there needs to be a conversation with their coworker who happens to be, I guess, Black in this case too. This person also mentioned that they have witnessed their coworkers being blatantly racist. So I guess my question or my pushback to that is, did this person then say anything? Or did they let that slide? Right, that's a problem if that's the case. Or if they only spoke to their coworker or their grade team partner after the fact, that's a problem, right? Because you're still allowing that that feeling, or you're perpetuating the racism that exists within that building, and that's definitely a problem. So you got to ask yourself, how does your grade team partner feel in that situation? They got to internalize all that and then go home with that, and then come back to work the next day. I've been in that situation. It's not a great place to be, right? It doesn't allow you to feel safe in your job, in the place you need to be in every single day. That's the problem. So how do they support? Make a stand, right? And I understand that that's difficult, but you have to make a stand. You have to be confident and stand in that and realize that that is the only way in which a community, in this case, the school community, will change realistically.
Do you see a lot of support from teachers that don't look like you? And I know it's I don't want to say it's rare to see a Black teacher because I know they're out there, and I had one at my son's school, and I have, I believe, one at my daughter's school right now. Is it hard to get help as a Black teacher?
To be honest,
other teachers that don't look like you to want to support?
so for me, and I'll answer this quickly, then I'll let Matthew go too. But like that's twofold. As I mentioned before, the vulnerability piece is huge, right? Especially as a big Black male. Like I'm 6'3", 245 pounds. So already with that, there comes the idea that Jay doesn't have feelings, or if he doesn't express his emotions in that way, then he must be fine. So it wasn't until like the very end of the school year where I literally broke down in a way that I said, I'm not feeling safe. There are these things that a lot of my quote unquote peers and friends and coworkers at school have said that I've had to go home and internalize that. And I wasn't willing or wanting to share those things and how they made me feel, right? So unless that part is recognized by people who look like us and willing to kind of push past that barrier, I would say that's the first step. The second response to that question, though, is I've had a lot of support behind closed doors. I'll say that, and that's a problem, right? I've had a lot of, I'm really sorry this happened, or I can't believe so-and-so said that behind closed doors. But similar to the question before, unless that stand is taken in person at that moment, I'm not trying to hear that as support anymore. Like, you can keep that. You're just showing me the same fear that you had this entire time. Like, where are you at when it really matters, man?
Yeah, it's funny because me and Jay, we've never that question, we've never sat around and thought about it, and I have pretty much an identical answer. When you asked it, the first thing that came to my head was, I perceive that folks who work with me are intimidated to engage in dialogue that has to do with anything other than pedagogy and like the classroom stuff.
Right.
So, yeah, the first step would be just, support in terms of, if you notice microaggressions, then call them out. I was in a meeting with a parent and both admin at my school because, not to get into too many details, a student did something that I felt was racist to another student, and the parent was upset about this. And the way she engaged with me was completely different than the two administrators. Every time she was speaking to me, at the end of every sentence, it was bro or guy or, very subtle things. And the admin called her out. And I was appreciative of that, because it's exhausting, as Jay says, to continuously internalize these small microaggressions. Someone constantly calling you bro or guy, yeah, it's not the end of the world, but the death by 1,000 cuts thing is real. When it happens every week, every month, we're at school for 196 days a year, I think. And when it happens 50, 60 times out of those days, it's a lot. So just calling it out, not being intimidated to speak on some of these things.
Another question, does the TDSB PD include bystander intervention training of any kind?
I can't answer that yet. We haven't actually done the PD yet. We can maybe answer that at the end of the week when it happens. The only kind of instruction, or pardon me?
Do you know what that would even look like?
Not, I can't answer that honestly. No, I don't think so.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Nope, that's fair. I know we've got like 3 minutes left. I'm just trying to get through a few more questions. Loving the term Black brilliance, and thanks for mentioning the way in which young Black men might show their interest in class differently than raising their hands. That seems so just normal. Why?
No, you're absolutely right.
Right? I mean, like, why is that? Why? And maybe I'm going to leave this almost as the last question. Why is it so hard for why is it so hard to look at Black students and realize that they're students. They're going to act and react in different ways. And why is there such a negative piece put on them not conforming to the norm? And yes, I understand that there's racism, but I just, like, I don't get why it needs to be such a negative bend on just how they react and how they act.
Lanrick, you hit it on the head when you mentioned conformity, man. We've all seen it, but I've seen it a lot, especially in the middle school setting, where it's like the old adage, like what is it? Circle peg into a square hole, right? You're trying to force something into an area or a place that it doesn't naturally exist. And that's the thought that comes to mind when you're thinking of these Black students. You're asking them to be something that they're not. And oftentimes when they're not that person or that idea of what you have as an ideal student, and then they show you that, you reprimand them for that. And that takes place in many ways, right? Through the microaggressions that we mentioned earlier, or sending them down to the office for simply, not raising their hand or being excited about a topic or wanting to show their quote unquote Black brilliance. Oftentimes they're definitely criminalized for that piece. And that's the struggle that we need to be able to come up with an answer with. That could be something that we can change moving forward, right? Do I have an answer? Definitely not. Why is that the case? I mean, you can dig into a lot of things we mentioned so far in terms of like the history of education, the fact that it's whitewashed, the fact that, you have people, as Matthew mentioned, who have taught teachers historically to be teachers, who have learned the way in which they have been taught themselves. So until, some of these things are changed, especially going back as far as the teacher education program, until some of these racist ideas and ideologies are changed, none of that will change. All that will be the same.
And I think very quickly, I think also, not to always like be negative on teachers. I think that sometimes they're trying to do it out of like, and what I'm about to explain what I mean when I say do it, like, I think they're trying to like help in a way, like they're trying to be saviors, where it's like, if you don't know how to use cutlery properly at a fine elite restaurant, they want to teach you how to do it before you go. But you can't do that with school and education, because brilliance doesn't operate like that. Brilliance doesn't operate in a universal form or fashion. And I think that's the problem sometimes. I think it comes from a place of like, no, you don't act like this. Don't do that. That's not the way you show you're interested. Things like that. And it's like, we're not trying to all be the same. Our cultures are different. So it's one of those weird things where, instead of the teachers learning youth and different cultures, they expect the kids to come to their level, quote unquote, and essentially change.
Gentlemen, I'm gonna leave it at that. Matthew J, it's been a privilege to be able to speak to you tonight. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for your generosity. Thank you for your insight on a topic that I don't want to go away. I don't want it to just be a hashtag that's gonna wash away after COVID has gone away. I want this to be front and center I want it to be front and center, period.
Yeah.
To the audience, thank you so much for your time tonight. If you have questions, if you have things that you want to bring up, and I know that not a whole lot was brought forth this evening, and that's okay. And there was no pressure that it needed to come out. But if you've got questions or ideas, please throw them. And Allison, I'm sorry I'm going to put this, but please put that into DECA's hands. Let's expand this conversation for DECA, for Allison, and for your team. Thank you so much for giving this space and allowing for opportunity to speak. We need to do more of this, and I know we will be.
Hey, thank you, Lanrick. Thank you, DECA. We appreciate the opportunity. By all means, every Thursday, just a little plug, every Thursday, Quarantine Ed is happening, Thursday, 7 p.m. Hit myself or Matthew up for information. And we're on Twitter at Mr. J. Will and at Call Me Mr. Morris. Let's continue the conversation, as Lanrick mentioned. There's plenty of work left to do. So with that, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you soon. All right.